Hi, welcome to another episode of I Mustache You Something. I've got Danny. Do you prefer Ishak or Ishak?
I mean, I go by Ishak, but his height is more accurate.
I mean, I just realized how that is a problem for me. And I think that um, I sort of underestimated how strong the feelings I had about the pronunciation of your last name.
I'm so sorry this had to surface right now, but
In
we could
front
go
of
with
all these
whichever.
people.
Huh?
I said in front of all of these
All
people.
these people in front of everybody on YouTube and on Facebook and wherever else it might be. So sorry that everybody had to see this, but we could go with whichever one you're more comfortable with.
I'm having second thoughts about interviewing you.
That's completely fair. I mean, I'm surprised it took this long. Like, yeah,
So what does your dad say?
at the office, or like, yeah, Dr. Ishak.
Dr. Ishak, huh?
Yeah.
Does he feel like he's being true to himself with that?
That's a really good question. I don't think it's ever crossed his mind as an issue.
No?
Because I didn't make up Ishak. I was told it was my last name. Like
Right, that's
you're
why I'm
told how
holding
you.
him responsible, right? I don't hold you
Yeah.
responsible. You're just doing
Well,
what you're
actually, it'd be his aunt who you should hold responsible. I think.
his who?
Um, his aunt. Like when she came, I think she did the spelling and the like initial pronunciation. I don't know if it was like completely original on his own, but yeah.
But he's an adult and he chose it for himself.
That's true, actually. But I'm an adult too, and I stuck with it. So if we're gonna go by like, are you an adult? I mean, I'm
Are
not
you?
really an adult, I guess. Yeah, maybe
No.
not.
I
No.
mean, I don't consider myself to be an adult. So,
Right.
you
Right.
know, I don't say that pejoratively. I just say it as a
It's just we're not adults.
reality. Like, you
Right.
know, I've managed to make it this far without being an adult. You are clearly not an adult.
I'm absolutely not an adult. So if the metric is Mina an adult, everybody under must not be an adult.
No, I mean, I think I've got a lot of room between me and adult. Like, I'm
Okay.
definitely not the watershed. Like, somebody could be significantly more mature than me and still not be anywhere close to being an adult. Like,
Got it.
I don't know, Mike Gabor. Mike Gabor is much more mature than I am, but is he an
Still
adult?
not an adult.
No,
Still not an adult.
no.
Okay. So who is an adult? Like what's who's an adult?
I don't know. Like your dad. Your dad's an adult.
That's true. He is an adult.
He's an adult.
Immigrating makes you an adult, I think. You have to, that
Yeah.
wakes you up real fast. Like
Yeah,
you
you put
adopt
your
to a new
big
country.
hat on, you say,
Yeah.
okay, like همسك
So
نفسي.
maybe I'll go to Egypt so then I could become an adult.
Unless you go to Egypt and you become even more irresponsible than you are now, which is
It's
possible for you because you're a
completely
very
possible.
right, you're a very
Yeah.
responsible non-adult right now. Like you go to
Right.
Egypt, you become an irresponsible non-adult. That doesn't make you more adult.
That's not helpful.
No.
That's good. All right. I'll keep all that in mind.
And you guys aren't the only iShacks. Like there's
Yeah.
there's iShacks, there's eShacks, there's all sorts of shacks that are and
Well,
and
if we
and
want to talk about spelling, Mina's spelled how many different ways?
but I'll tell you that I don't think that there's different correct ways of spelling Mina. I think there's only
Okay.
one correct way of spelling Mina,
Okay.
because it's a Coptic name, and if you go back to the Coptic um, spelling, you
Yeah.
transliterate that into English, and you end up with MENA. Like that's there. There's no
Hmm.
conversation there. But I think what is creating a sensitivity in me is not my first name, but my last name, because Mesiha is Mesih, and for some reason, people feel that there's a need to gravitate the S and the H, and instead of Mesiha, it ends up being Mesha, Meshia, Maisha, Manisha, all sorts of, so like as a fellow person who has an S and an H in their last name,
Right.
mine happens to have an I, and in both cases, whether it's Masiha or Ishat, either way, it's not a sh sound. But
Right.
you, in a very heretical fashion, have accepted this westernized bastardization of your name.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just a metaphor of what's happened to my identity too. Who knows?
Tell me more.
Oh, there's nothing under that. I mean, I guess you could globally look at, you say at a certain point you adapt your personality and identity to the land of immigration. Um, but I meant it as a joke. Plus the difference between your name and mine, the S and the H are together, whereas yours you have the I. So
Yeah, but in both cases, whether it's real or imposed, in your case it's real that the S and the H are touching, and in my
yeah,
case it's imposed by people that are illiterate. It's something that results in a change, and that change can be perceived as a change in identity, right? Where
that's true.
like um I'll make a public confession here. I was called Aisha um in soccer from seventh grade until 10th grade, because when I showed up my first day of soccer, seventh grade, the coach said the names of the students that were there showing up for soccer, and he mispronounced my last name. And I love him. He was one of my favorite people um, in middle school and high school. But he said Mina Maisha, and there was a popular song at the time called Aisha, and the eighth graders on the team were like Aisha, and like that was it.
That was it.
That was my nickname for 4 years. And in your case, it's not this like identity struggle that I went through and like, like, don't call me that. But you're like, oh yeah, call me that. That's great.
Yeah, no, I was much more accepting of it.
I don't know if I'm envious or upset, or like your acceptance of this new identity challenges my, lack of acceptance of my challenging, you know, of my identity.
Yeah. I'm very willing to accept the circumstances in front of me just as they are. Maybe that's just a personal flaw.
Is it a flaw or is it a feature?
It could, you could paint it one way or the other. In some cases, it's a flaw, and in some cases, it's a feature. I think maturing is when you learn when to navigate, and you learn this is when you accept and this is when you don't accept, as opposed to just continually accepting and getting steamrolled.
Or what's the alternative? Like, because you're saying
The
like
al-
something
the
isn't.
alternative is getting like just continually accepting circumstances and never advocating for yourself.
You said that twice though, because again, that's your
No,
disposition. That's the only way you see things, is like getting
oh,
steamrolled.
like black and white?
Well, no.
No.
So the alternative to getting steamrolled isn't accepting.
The alternative to getting steamrolled is not accepting. I would dispute that.
So tell me, what do you think?
I would say, like, I think generally, if you're not the, like, I think there's certain things in life where you accept the circumstances in front of you, and that's okay. But there's other times in your life where you shouldn't accept the circumstances. And in that moment where you shouldn't accept the circumstances and you do accept them, that's a circumstance where you're getting steamrolled. Like if you advocate for yourself, then obviously you're now out of steamrolled, because in advocating for your position, you can no longer, like, I don't think you're getting steamrolled anymore. Even if the circumstance stays the same.
So is there no reality where you advocate and actually succeed
Yeah,
without
but
getting
that's, yeah, that's like you advocated for yourself. What I'm saying is when you accept circumstances that you shouldn't accept and you don't say anything, that's what I would call like the steamroll.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. I
Yeah,
agree with you.
that's
So,
what the steamroll is. Yeah,
okay, so not acting is sometimes the right thing and sometimes the wrong thing,
correct.
right? And if not acting and keeping your peace was the right move, great.
Hmm.
If not acting and being accepting of a horrendous situation,
Hmm.
right, with the wrong thing, then you define that as getting steamrolled. What's the other
Correct.
side of the equation where you act?
And nothing changes or act and
So, what are the scenarios of acting?
so you could act and nothing changes. You could act and there's like a change that's somewhere in the middle. And then you could act where the change that you're advocating for occurs.
Okay. And also, just like when you can accept and you really should have spoken up and not gotten steamrolled, or accept and that was the right move, sometimes you act and it was the wrong move. Like you should have not
Yeah,
acted,
and that 100%.
right? And sometimes you act and that was the right move. And the right move of acting doesn't necessarily mean like you got what you wanted, right? Sometimes you act, right? You say, I did the right thing regardless of the outcome, right?
Yeah.
So we've both been there, and you know, I um, will be, I think, posting yours the day after I post Mike Gabor, and you know, the three of us are on the team of people that helped to establish Canonia Ventures for the
Hmm.
diocese charity, and I think as individuals and as an organization, we've been there where we've tried to do the right thing, and sometimes you do the right thing, you get the result that you don't want. Sometimes you do the right thing and you do get the result, but regardless of whether it's the result that you want or not, the goal is not to get the result that you want. The goal is to do the right thing, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So how do you discern that? How do you figure out not whether you're going to get what you want, but whether it's the right time to act or not?
I think you live your life according to principles. Um, and when like the things that are occurring in front of you or the way you're acting is not in accordance with those principles, it's time to say something. And I think for any like as you like I say this as a 25-year-old, right, who's still in the process of finding like his identity, his voice, and maturing. But like as you refine those principles, the like your margin of error in terms of how far does this stray from them, like those principles, like gets more and more like accurate, and then you're better able to fine tune your day to day life. But yeah, I think it's just in relation to your principles.
And how do those principles um, both influence and get influenced by being in a community?
I think they're certainly influenced by what like I think your community helps develop your initial instincts, and your initial like reaction to the world, and then you go into the world and you leave the community or whatever or the home, whatever it may be, whatever bubble in like was the incubator for those principles or those initial principles, because I think at that point it would be a mistake to call them like the way like the foundation on which you build your life. It's a starting point, and then you apply them, and through like failure, I would say mostly failure, you start to refine them. I think like failure is a privilege. What?
I don't want to rain on your failure parade, but
Hmm.
is there a role for success?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I think success is valuable. I think failure is more valuable. Um, like I think and I'm speaking for myself in this case and like my own experiences. I think success is great. It's awesome. I think failure teaches you more. I think my principles and the way I live my life has been refined through failure more than it has been through success. Because you only find success once you failed a certain amount. And again, I'm speaking for myself. So I find failure to be like a privilege and a blessing. And it like tests you every single day. But I find it to be more valuable. Yeah.
Do we seek failure then?
I think for me personally, I could say what I seek is to push 110%, like 100% every day. And inevitably, the failure will find me and I will find the failure. We will meet. And you learn from it and then you move on. Like, I don't think you actively need to seek it. It'll inevitably happen. The important thing is to be in the mindset to learn from it and to be in the mindset to be humbled by it and to accept it and be aware of it, I think.
What's the alternative? Like if you say, I seek after excellence, I uh, put myself in a position where the the success is not going to be guaranteed, right? Because that's the alternative, right? Is like if you're afraid of failure, you never venture into something that doesn't guarantee success, right? So if you say, fine, I will put myself in a position to fail, right? And I put myself in a position to learn from that failure.
Mm-hmm.
We see that the alternative to the first one is you don't take risks. What's the alternative to the second one? The one where you do put yourself in a position to fail, but not learn from it. Like, what does that look like?
Well, that looks like pride, first and foremost. Second, I think it just looks like failure. Like the fact that you would be in a position to fail and that you don't recognize it is in and of itself a failure. And I would say in the first case too, even if you don't put yourself in a position to fail, you will. So what I see life as coming down to is recognizing the moments that you did and then building off of that. Because you can always hold yourself to that higher standard or those around you to that higher standard or push to that next like level. So that's the way I kind of view it.
Yeah. And it sounds like this is a core part of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the relationship between your core identity and your community, how
Mm-hmm.
did your community, as loosely or as specifically as you'd like to define that, how does your community um, play into this identity, and how did you get to a point where this part of your identity was formed?
So I guess to like first define the community that that formed my initial thoughts, I would say would be like my parents and like extended family, more so than like the larger Coptic community, at least in my case. And so I had this like before I went to college, and I would call that the transition point for me. It's like I had this picture of like, here's what like, here are the principles that I think I should live by, or here's how I perceive myself. And then I got to college and I did not live in that way. I did not live according to those principles. Like I didn't like push hard enough. I didn't work hard enough. I wasn't self-aware. I wasn't, not that I am these things now, but like it's a spectrum, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I found that like there was a standard that I saw around me and that I thought I had attained, and that's pride. Like I thought like, all right, this is the way like I live my life. And then you find that like reality does not, match that at all. And so like through like and at the time, it's obviously super tough to like, it's like a little mini identity crisis. It's like, who am I? What am I doing? Like I've completely failed myself, my family, everybody around me. Like, and then from that you build. I don't
So
know. Does that answer the question?
how did you realize that?
Um, a few different ways. I think there's like one day where you wake up, like for me, it was after like my freshman year of college. You wake up, you look in the mirror, and you're like, I don't like who I've become. And you stop making excuses for like why you are the way you are. Secondly, there was metrics, grades. Like I wasn't performing like the way I wanted to, and that was like an easy metric to like say, all right, well, I didn't get the numbers I wanted, and it wasn't because like, oh, the exam was too hard or whatever. It was because I didn't put in the right amount of work to get like, to the place I wanted to be. And that like easy objective metric then like reveals everything below. It's like, well, why didn't I reach that point? How did I prioritize my time? What were my values?
At at any point, did you question whether academic
Sorry, I
success?
just got a phone call. Let me put on do not disturb. Oh, I can't hear you. Um, 1 second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't hear you. I don't know why. Can you try again?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can't hear you. That's weird.
You're ruining the mojo here. Oh, you can't hear me. I can say anything I want. Danny, I actually really like you. I know I'm really hard on you, but I think you're a great guy and I love you. And everything that I say that's coming across as tough or challenging is only out of my love for you.
I just heard my love for you. So
Yeah, I was saying about how little I like you and how this is ruining whatever little love I have for you.
that sounds about right.
It was very little, like tiny, tiny little bit.
Yeah.
So now that that tiny little bit of love that I used to have for you is gone, can we continue?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. Where were we?
We were talking about how you weren't living up to your standards of academic excellence, and that instead of changing your standards, you changed your behavior.
Yeah, and I think what I'd want to emphasize there is like the grades themselves, I don't think matter, like the numbers themselves. It was more about like why did they happen? It's like you're not pushing yourself. You like I think the four like when we talked about principles, I think the four principles I try to live by are like love, like first and foremost, work ethic, discipline, and self-awareness. And whatever failure I encounter in my life is usually because one of those things, one of those pillars wasn't up to where it should be. And it's an opportunity to refine that pillar, to like build on it. And so like in that first year of college where you're out of the house, you're like all right, well, who am I? Like how what standards do I hold myself to? Um, who do I want to be? And what influences my character? A lot of that, like that's where a lot of like my can't find the right word for it, but like for me at least the transition happened in the way I think.
And again, like I think now you can articulate those things.
Yeah.
Say, can you list them for us again?
Love, um, discipline, work ethic, and self-awareness.
So discipline and work ethic will lump together. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So love, discipline slash work ethic, and self awareness. And you realized that when you weren't living up to your own expectations with just one of many metrics being grades, but other things being also present,
Mm-hmm.
you realize um, I'm not living up to these expectations. Maybe most palpably the work ethic slash discipline, but maybe in other parts, the love and the self awareness as well, right?
I actually think self-awareness was the biggest lapse.
Okay,
um, I think that was
talk,
the biggest
talk
issue.
us through that.
Well, I think like in any journey, there's a lot of flags that you're going down the wrong path. And if you try to have an awareness around you, like of yourself and like your surroundings, and you try to like humble yourself, you could pick up on those flags. You could say, well, here's where here's why. Was it because of this person or that person, or because, like this like random situation happened? It was simply because I did not prepare myself. I didn't do the things I needed to do. You know what I mean? Um, and so I like in failing to pick up on those flags because of a lack of self-awareness, even if you're working hard, you're running down the wrong path, and you're not gonna end up where you want to be. So even if your work ethic is a little, at least like this is, again, like I couldn't even identify these four things to you like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So who knows if like this will stay the same for me, or if like maybe in 4 years we'll look back at this like, no, I was completely off. But like current thinking is like, even if the work ethic is less, but you're able to be aware of what you're doing, and you're able to be honest with yourself, um, then you know uh, you're more likely to find what we would define success.
And I think you kind of answered my next question, which is, were you aware of these things as um, values then?
No.
So how were you able to act on these values and calibrate yourself to behave in a way that aligns with these values, right? Where you change not your values, but your behavior, right?
Hmm.
You decided love, discipline, and self awareness were going to be things that you lived by, not things that you're going to put aside just because it got too hard. Because, well, I tried and it didn't really work. So instead of living by these things, I'm going to instead just be more of a fan of laziness, selfishness, and ignoring any data to the contrary that I am the greatest person ever, right?
So the question is, how did I make the active decision to pursue these values that were unknown to me at the time? Yeah. I think uh, objectively it was easy to see that I wasn't going where I wanted to be going. Like I think, not that I am now, but like at the time it was very easy to see, like, this is, whatever this is not working for me. So then it's like, well, why? um and in changing, like at the time, like I said, I couldn't identify for you what the values are, but in adjusting my behavior to, like, in responding to the failures, like, or in attempting to like correct to like the objective things that I wanted to occur in my life, these principles came to light more and more and more. And I found that like they were the constants, like they were the constant, like force. Like when I found when things were going well, it was because of these things. When things were going poorly, it was because they were absent. When things needed to improve on, it was usually because one of them needed a little fine tuning, or a lot of fine tuning. And so it was just a process of, like, I think, trial and error. And I just, like, I named them for you now, but at the time, I don't think I could have named them for you. And maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe they actually are something else. Um, I could say, for like, one reason when we had first discussed doing this, I was like a little hesitant. And one of the reasons why I was hesitant is because I find that my thinking like changes, evolves, like like you start to discover, what, I should have considered this situation differently, or this situation should have acted differently. And so to me it was like a little, like, not scary, but like a little, like, I don't know why I would want to share what I'm thinking with anybody right now, because I know for me it evolves and it changes, and I want it to evolve, it to change. So I don't want to like share things that I know, like, in 5 years from now are going to be completely different, or maybe completely different. Nor do I want to make it seem like, you know what, I have it like in my wisdom, this is what I've arrived to. So I think that's I guess my little spiel. I don't know what, like, I don't know exactly what brought me to that last point, but there it is.
Why share then?
Um, well, like on a surface level, because I love you, and it was something we talked about doing. On a on a more um, on like a little bit of a deeper level, it's like human beings only grow through sharing with each other. Like that's what we were designed to do. We were designed to share experiences, to share knowledge, and in that space of honesty, transparency, where you can look at, like, you know, the things that went well, the things that didn't go well, you share your strengths and your weaknesses. As a society, as a community, you grow, and that's something that's valuable. That's something that shouldn't be undermined. um, and it's almost selfish then to not say, well, look, here's where I messed up, or here's what I'm unsure about, because what you're doing, you're taking away from like the body of knowledge that is available to a wider like public. um, so people could consider what you have to say or what you don't have to say. They could say, you know what, he's full of it, and this is why I think he's full of it. Or no, that resonates with me because those were the experiences that like I have found to be true in my life, and that stimulates some sort of like internal, at least, dialogue, where you could say, um, all right, well, what did I take away or not take away from this? So I think that's why, on a deeper level.
And the way that you got there was you were talking about um, the iterative process that you started doing more deliberately recently, but were doing sort of implicitly in college, which is acting and believing, right? We believe something and it causes us to act a certain way. We act a certain way and it reinforces our belief, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a deviation, that deviation creates what's called a cognitive dissonance, where your
Mm-hmm.
belief and your actions are not lining up. It doesn't it doesn't survive in
Yeah.
that form and needs to be resolved somehow. Either you change your belief or you change your action. And it sounds like, as you reflect back, you weren't really sure what you believed, right? You couldn't articulate that you believe in love, discipline, and self awareness, but you just didn't like what you saw.
Yeah.
And you started acting in a way that you thought maybe was going to drive you in a direction that you were happier with what you saw. Like you realize, like, listen, there's some clearly wrong things. I don't know how I'm going to fix them, but I'm going to try. And those actions ended up pushing you to become the person who you are, right? And the person that you are is made up of these actions and these beliefs.
Nope.
And it doesn't really matter which comes first, the belief or the action or the belief. It doesn't really matter because the two are really one and the same.
Yeah. And I think it's a cyclical process of refinement, where it's like your actions reflect or they don't reflect, or your beliefs reflect that they don't reflect, and eventually, like, through that like process, which includes what we were initially talking about, a lot of failure, you have the privilege of growing.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, like there's all like succeeding, right? Also feeds into that, right? Because if you align with your values of love and discipline and self-awareness, and it bears fruit, right? And and success might be defined in a weird way where it might look like failure to someone else, right?
Yeah.
But your success, right, as you have defined it based on these values, reinforces that desire to behave in this way.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think success. I think there's almost there. There's almost nothing in life that's black and white. So like, it's I wouldn't like. Of course, success has a place, and of course, it's a key part of the process. I think the only point I was trying to make was I personally find in my life failure to be a little bit more useful, and I think that may be just a result of the stage I'm in right now, or like the mindset I'm in right now. And it could be we look back at this in 5 years and you're like, what were you thinking, man? Like, of course it was the success that reinforced your behavior. And I'm very willing to like, adjust like my thinking.
I mean, I unfortunately agree with you, and I think you know this already that I'm pushing back on the value of failure, um, because I hope for you that you don't perpetually feel that way, um, moving forward, and that you can grow out of that.
Yeah.
And my hope for you is that your successes are more than your failures, and that you can thrive in success. And you know, it's not something that I disagree with. It's just something you know, and I think this is true, um, for my own kids. Like, I hope that they don't have to go through the things that I had to go through, right? But there's also the flip side of, I worry that if they're coddled and they don't go through those same challenges I went through, then they
Yep.
get out into the real world and they just have really no awareness of what reality looks like, right? They go
Hmm.
out there and, like, the first time they stub their toes, it's like, what am I gonna do, right? So,
Hmm.
I I see you as a little brother that I don't want. No, Habibi, no, like, don't embrace failure so much. I want you to succeed. And I, I think it's more of an emotional reaction than it is an
Yeah.
intellectual. I think like, intellectually, I agree with you. As relationally, I wish, no, Habibi, no. Like, I wish that it would be different than that, but I wish I
Yeah.
could disagree intellectually.
No, I think even on an emotional level, I think like if we were to say, and I agree that like embracing failure is a path to success. Like I don't think it doesn't bother me at all emotionally, like at all, like zero, almost zero. Um, as long as that happens in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Like the only time failure has ever bothered me is if like it was a result of like you didn't put in 100% or you failed like in being honest with yourself. Other than that, the objective ones, they're just like a path, and you keep moving.
What about, for someone that you love, for them to fail?
If I actually, so like I was talking about this with someone recently. I think it's like a good thing. I think it's a privilege. I
Mm.
think the challenge is, and part of a process of maturation is seeing it for what it is. So like there's people in my life who have perceived that they've failed, but like, you see them and you objectively know, and they objectively know they put in 100%. And they saw the process of like they put in 100% and they still didn't get where they wanted to be. And it's extremely challenging and emotional. I see that as like the crucible, like that's the fire that like forms you,
Not
and
for
that's a good
you,
thing.
not for you
Yeah,
yourself. For this
for
person that
them,
you love,
yeah, a hundred
you're
percent. That
happy that they.
as long as like it's like like if they put in 100% and they can rest easy in that fact, like as long as that like condition is there, I see it as like then what else is there? Like you put in 100%. This is
They're
the
still
fire
there,
that, huh?
but they're still, like you said, they're still devastated emotionally. They're like,
Yeah,
questioning
but like
themselves.
you get to
Maybe
grow
I
through
didn't
that.
put in 100%. Maybe I'm the one that didn't
Yeah, but
succeed.
you get to grow through that. That's like I think it's I mean the Bible talks a lot about it, not like in I think it's James like 2:5 where it says like various trials like will come your way, and like essentially the message is that these trials are a privilege and you grow from them. And in Matthew 7, like 13, you're encouraged, you're told to take the narrow road. Like the Bible like you see the story of Job, like the Bible speaks to you and it reflects reality in that failure is a privilege. Like as long as you have the right mindset going into it. And it's like, I think for me, like the process of maturation, the process of like getting like feeling comfortable in your identity is being able to accept that, view it as a privilege, and get up off the mat and you keep moving forward without it having like totally emotionally devastate you, because I don't think there's a reason why it should, as long as you did the like your work. Like if you put in your work, then like it's just another it's like it's a good thing that it happened.
Do you have an opinion on whether this is something that is unique to you and your upbringing, or something that is more generalized in our community? This
I'm
embracing
not
of
sure.
suffering?
I think I watched my parents work extremely hard to like create a life for me and my sister that like it was like, I'm sure that they couldn't even imagine when they moved to this country in like 91. They were like, so to me it's, and like I saw the road, like the bumps like along the way, I saw what it cost them, like, you know, in terms of, you know, you leave your family behind, you're working these really long hours. um it's like emotionally and physically taxing. And so to me, like watching them go through that, and like every time, like anytime something difficult happened, it was just an opportunity for growth. um I see it as like I have no excuse. Not only do I have no excuse, I have a responsibility to make, i I have like I have a responsibility, like an inherent responsibility, to make everything that I saw like worth it. Like because if it ends with me, then it was for nothing. Like you pass it down. So maybe that's where like I don't know if I'm able to answer if it's like I saw it in a larger community, because I also grew up like I would go to church on Saturdays, because I was at the like I was at it was in Charlton, like a church was on Saturdays, that was our closest church. But then and then like Saturdays and Saturday nights, sometimes Sundays, you'd hang out with people from church. But Monday through Friday, and then except those times on Saturday, I was at home or I was at school. So my viewfinder was pretty focused on like, all right, well, what are they doing? And that like kind of informs my experience.
Where do you think they got it from?
It's a good question. I think they get it from their parents. I think it's like passed down familially. They get it from their parents. They get it from the experience of, I mean, I think it takes already to begin with like a special kind of person to like, it's self-selecting to immigrate here. Like you move to, you leave your family behind.
Right.
You're gonna redo like your licensing exams, like in your like chose a profession or start a business, whatever it may be. And then you like you it's a new language, a new cultural, a new set of norms. You're going to raise your kids in this type of environment while trying to like impart some of the values that you grew up with, and hoping that they like don't stray too far from what you consider to be like important or valued. It's an extremely demanding like task. So um I think maybe they have some internal drive that I don't know where they might have got it besides their families, but regardless, it's a fact that it's there. Um, and you hope you can take a piece of it without diluting it and pass it down, because I think that's a responsibility we all have.
So far we've discussed your values, which are love, discipline, and self-awareness, and that you learn these from your parents, and that it's still a work in progress to figure out if these are your final values.
Yeah,
um, and it's a work of discovery to figure out where maybe your parents got them. It's clear that these values are useless unless they're acted out. And if you don't act them out, then they're not really your values. And as you act them out and as you live them, they become more solidified as your values.
Hmm.
So now, Danny,
Hmm.
I mustache you something. Do you think that these values are um, Christian values? And if so, how do we pass them along, not just to the next family member, but to the community?
I think they are Christian values.
Okay.
And I think the nice thing about, like, to me, like one way I understand Christianity to be the truth is that the values it teaches are like translate to secular life. Um, so like that's like a confirmation for me. But how do you pass them on to like the people in your community? That was the second question.
Yeah, because
I
if we
Yeah.
agree that these are, norms, right, to say that, these are values that we believe as Christians, then we need to find a way to say, okay, like I'm not just going to pass them on to my progeny, but these are community values.
Yeah.
So how?
I think you act them out, like you try your best to live in a way that reflects those principles that you consider to be important. And when you fail those principles, I think it's important to stand up and say, here's I failed, and here's why I failed, here's how I failed, and here's what I plan to do going forward. Nobody's perfect. Nobody expects anybody to be perfect. But I think like if you if you live in a way that like attempts to like reflect those like core principles, then like I could tell you like a story. I I went on like this medical like like when I was a junior in college, I went to Haiti for, after like the spring semester was over, and we were like setting up like a clinic, like a pharmacy. You see some patients, the whole deal, and then you go home. So I was on this trip. I was like hanging out with some people, and I was like telling jokes, and I was swearing while I was telling the jokes. Right, my language was not clean. And so some like one of the like kids who didn't know me, like we had just met on this trip, he comes up to me, he goes, "Yo, I thought you were Christian." I go, "I am," and he goes, "You were swearing a lot." I go, "You're right. I clearly was not. I was not acting like in a way that was like." And let's be very clear here. I'm not like saying like that problem's been solved or anything like that to the larger audience, nor that I'm like this like reformed person. But what I'm saying is like there's ways you could like demonstrate what you believe to be important, and when you don't, like at the time I was like who's this guy, like you're gonna like judge me, but like he's right, I wasn't. And like it's something like even if I continue to make the same mistake, you be somewhat conscious of it. Is like you're not living like a truth you believe in. um so I think that's how you do it.
How about if someone doesn't have that same self-awareness and ability to be corrected that you demonstrated with that situation, and they say, I'm not wrong, you're wrong, right? And you can generalize that for really anything, right? Like it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily need to be um swearing. It could be insert value here,
Yeah.
right? And someone wants to say, no, like you don't get to decide for me what it means to be Christian. How do we address that as a community?
um that's I think if I had the answer to that, like I'd be lying. So like I could tell you what I think. I think generally, bec- I think it's important to see the value in what like the person who you're disagreeing with generally in our community, whatever it may be. they have a perspective. They have something, they have a fear that motivates them to like focus on whatever they're focusing on. I think it's like in a process of self-awareness, it's important to say like, listen, like this person is emphasizing the thing they're emphasizing because they're scared like of something, or they fear something, or something's important to them. And it's important for me to be able to identify that fear or motivation and call it valid. And likewise, you would hope the person's able to do the same for your perspective. And then that's how you start to say, like, that's how you start to meet and identify, here are mutual goals, here are mutual objectives, here's how we disagree on how to like achieve them. And here's why I see part of your disagreement as valid, and here's where I hope you see part of mine as valid. Where can those two things be reconciled? Now, the process of getting to that is, like you said, self-awareness. No, you did say self-awareness. You said, how do you do it without self-awareness? That was your question. I don't think you can, personally. I think that's okay. I think it's constructive, and until you're able to do it with some measure of self-awareness, you have to be held responsible, you have to be held accountable, and you'll inevitably fail. If you continually fail and it has consequences, and you refuse to recognize those consequences, then I don't know what to tell you. Like you eventually will be held accountable, one way or the other, whoever it may be. But I think people naturally, through like continued failure and like growth in a process, they start to realize, here's where like what's actually going wrong. Like I think every human being at a certain point, unless they like there's something wrong, starts to internally reflect as to why the things that are happening. And I think things will like continue to deteriorate or progress depending on what your perspective is, until you reach that point. I'm giving you a very long-winded answer that I'm not sure makes sense in response, because I don't know if I have like a really concrete answer. So I'm being like kind of, we're going like in like a God knows what kind of shape. Does that kind of like address what?
I mean, you are connecting dots here in that you're saying dialogue, number one, self-awareness and self-questioning in that dialogue, number two. And if you're able to do those two things, then we together as a community can move forward.
Right.
Right. And you
Yeah,
said,
those are the steps.
right, you said like, I wish you could do this without self-awareness, but you can't.
No.
You can't, right? Because if the only thing that you see is what you see, and someone else says, I see it differently, it's impossible for them not to get frustrated. And it's impossible for that conversation and that dialogue and that complex idea to progress, right? Because if one person just like, this is it, and I'm not going to see it any other way, then, it's okay. But what you're saying is, but you also said that if that's how this person chooses to live, that's their prerogative. But hopefully, with experiences and failures and awarenesses that come as a result of those failures, they can be nudged into a self-aware place where it's like, well, maybe I should question myself.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think that we have an inherent responsibility to be accommodating. We started off talking about like getting steamrolled and not getting steamrolled. I think we have an inherent responsibility to be as accommodating as possible of like those perspectives. Like the person who will not budge because they lack, like say this individual lacks self-awareness or is unable to reflect. I think you at like, if you're saying like, listen, I objectively know that this person doesn't see what I'm trying to say. Like they're not trying to see the value in what I'm trying to say, or I'm missing it. Like I, in my own head, am missing what they're trying to say. I have a responsibility then, like depending on in like my role in the organization, to say, here's what I can do around it, and here's what I just have to then say. All right, I accept, and that's okay. I said my piece, and that was my responsibility. Like, and I think that like if we're gonna take that and put it in the context of the church, I think that's like the like in the church, like for example, I would see like any role I were to have, like in any position I was in, it's like, listen, here's what I think, here's why I think what I think, here's why I think what you're saying is like important, and here's what I'm advocating for. If you see value in it, great. If you don't, I understand. But I feel like I have an inherent responsibility, one, to say what I think, and two, to have a constructive relationship with you. So going forward, we'll see where that takes us.
And I think something that I didn't appreciate until recently is the value of sticking around in what seems to be a fruitless conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean like, you know, oh, like, we're discussing something. No, I mean like an ongoing conversation, right? That we're having, right? As a community, right? Like, there's a lot of historical conversations that we've had, like about Sunday school, about the liturgy, about language. COVID has brought, lots of questions regarding, safety and, communion and, the allegations of sex abuse that have come up over the course of this year and how to handle those. All of those things have been very, very challenging, with this year being iconic of that. Now, if you feel strongly about your position, smile, present it, say, hey, this is a strong opinion that I have about this thing. And if there's room for dialogue, great. And if, like you said, for whatever reason, there seems to be a block, right, that's keeping us from getting somewhere, there's a risk of taking a temporary situation and making it permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you say, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere, right? Let's maintain a good relationship and let's keep this conversation going another time. Then it invites the other person to look objectively and ask, how's this working out?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They can choose to change their minds. They can choose to not change their minds. Either way, I love you. I respect you. Let's keep the conversation going when you're ready. But if you're the one that walks away, you're taking what you consider to be and what may objectively be the right answer, and you're leaving with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
So we're back to failure and suffering because I think that's a tough situation to be in, where you feel like you're trying to make a good point and it's not getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And where your point about accepting failure is a good thing, if you can't wrap your head around that, then unless you have convinced this person of what you want to convince them of, you failed and I'm leaving, right? But if you accepted failure as kind of like just part of the process, then you're able to stick around, right?
Yeah, as part of the process is the important part. Yeah. Not as like a termination point.
So I think all of those points that you made, I think, are very well connected and very valuable and very interesting to me, and hopefully helpful to someone that's listening. So I appreciate it, and I do think that you, as I've told you before, are wise beyond your years, and that one of the greatest pieces of wisdom that you have apprehended already is this willingness to change your mind, and your willingness to say, listen, I might completely disagree with this a few years from now. And I don't think there's any problem with that.
Mhm.
And being open to saying, I'm going to say what I have to say. Tell me if I'm missing something. What do you think? I think that's absolutely fair. And I think that anybody at any age, you could be 10 years old and take that stance. And I think that's appropriate. You can be 80 years old, take that stance. And I think it's perfectly appropriate. So I appreciate that. And I, you know, I you know, aspire to do that as well, whenever possible. So thank you for that, Danny.
Mm.
Um, any parting wisdom for anybody who happens to be listening?
Um, no parting wisdom. I just hope the message that came across was, or that didn't come across at least, was that I have any of this figured out. So that was the what the guy would like to avoid, that any of this is like a concrete position. Or I think like the most what I would hope to communicate is that this is just what I've learned thus far, and this is how I live thus far. And I'm, who knows what's next.
Amen, my friend.
Amen.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for listening.